Go for it.
Oh.
So if everything is normal, I think we have a normal P wave, not taking into account the delay just yet. But everything would be normal all the way through the AV node, but the electrical signal, since it's delayed in that one track, once it gets to the AV node, it'll start backfilling into that delayed section. The QRS segment would all be normal because nothing is technically affecting that. So I believe that your P wave would be normal. I believe that your PR interval would be normal because there's no delay on the other two tracks. Your QS segment would be normal. I think you would have a negative deflection somewhere in the PR interval because of that backfill on that segment.
We thought something similar, but just in the PR, you would have something that looked like artifact, like another P wave that wouldn't be quite as tall. Because, like Chandler was saying, all of our signal is still getting through, and the muscle is contracting for our normal P wave, which is getting to the AV, which is our PR, to delay that signal. So our PR would be the same, but while it's delaying in that PR segment, the delay that's coming through that left side is now firing off the rest of those contractile cells, that small amount, which would create its own small P wave.
I would argue that it was less amplitude through the atrium because of that one side, so you'd have a notch in your P wave.
But I don't think the P wave,
Because you have
the signal is going from the 80 back up that track. Instead of having, if you're talking lead to, you'll have a normal positive deflection in the P wave, but you'll have a negative deflection in the P wave because the signal is going away from the channel.
you just have that whole section right there that is delayed, is not getting as much conduction as everything else, so it's not going to show as much of an amplitude on your thing.
I would agree with that.
As normal would, because you have a whole section of the heart that's having a delayed reaction to the electricity, so that's why you have a notch.
Why wouldn't that just delay your PR segment?
I don't think it would delay it because
then-
the rest. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I think it would delay it because if you're waiting for the AV node to reach its threshold or whatever to send its signal, and now one of your pathways is not functioning, it's going to take longer for those other waves of the heart to send their signal
To the
more.
To the
You know
AV,
what I'm
yeah.
saying? Because
But-
your amplitude would be less since it says voltage. But you're going to have to wait longer for that same amount of voltage to then pass through the narrowed opening. It's like traffic.
But in theory, even if we lost the other pathways and just had one pathway, wouldn't that be enough to set off the AV to meet its threshold and then pass off its signal? Does it need all three of those pathways to be able to trigger the threshold of the AV?
Is that what you're saying?
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we argued about that and didn't arrive at any conclusion.
I would argue that any one of those pathways could start the threshold to the AV.
I think that's true. I think you have a signal that starts at the SA, travels to the AV by 3 different routes. If one route is delayed, it doesn't delay the other two. So everything else would be normal from there on down. Since those pathways are so fast and they get to the AV node, just because that one's got a delay on that side doesn't mean it's going to make it through before the backfill channel.
Yeah. And even when it does finally hit the AV would be in refractory, so that signal coming through that's delayed shouldn't have an effect on the AV.
What happens if I change this a little bit and take it away from pathways for a second? And let's think of atrial cells. Okay? like contractile cells. Let's say that the process here, these sets of cells right here are, they're not isolated. They're not isolated. They can still be depolarized from any direction. But the timing that it takes for the signal to get through here into these cells, albeit as much slower than normal, is still fast enough that these cells right here will get depolarized by those and not depolarized backwards from the AV.
Wait, what?
Gotcha.
You saying
Do you
the
understand what I'm
cells
saying?
after the delay?
It'll
You know what
go
I'm
around the
saying?
block.
So this delay that we have here is definitely a delay, more than normal. But this line of track right here is still being depolarized by this, because it's not such a delay that it can't get that done, rather than coming backwards from the AV node.
So would that mean that that portion of the right atrium would just not contract as efficiently, or in conjunction with the rest of that right atrium?
Well, definitely the timing of
Slower.
the contractile cells here would be off compared to the contractile cells everywhere else, yes. I'm more interested in what's happening electrically though, rather than mechanically.
And since the P wave represents electrical conduction through the contractile muscles of the atrium, that's why my argument of a notch would be there, because you have less electrical activity of contractile muscles at that spot.
So, okay.
And that's why you might see a dip in the P wave at that time.
Altered morphology.
Yeah,
Good.
Some kind of artifact.
yeah.
Or is there anything that happens at all? I mean, electrically, yeah, there is something that happens there because there's a little bit of a delay, but does that affect the overall?
Well, that's a good question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, if you have, I mean, it's almost like you have backup pathways is what it's designed for.
Or
The other
the,
ones are taking control.
So talk to me about this cell. Under normal circumstances, talk to me about that cell's depolarization and repolarization. Nothing's wrong with this track, with this set of sequences.
it's under normal circumstances.
Just talk to me about its depolarization and repolarization and everything related to
Then
that cell.
it's depolarized along its concentration gradient because the cell,
Talk to me on a grosser scale, more
It's depolarized by the other autorhythmic cells in line, because that's
Okay.
faster.
from what direction to what direction.
From the top to the
top to
bottom.
the bottom.
Okay? Okay, and, give me more information. So you're saying it's being depolarized from its cells above it,
Yeah.
yes? Okay, give me more information.
And it's sending a
Calcium.
signal down, it's continuation, or it's continuing the signal down toward the AV node.
And
So
out
it's
as
got
well.
junctions that
And
continue to
out.
sit and sit there, good,
And it's also,
continuing it out.
okay,
and out
and,
both directions.
yes, but what's happening if it goes that way?
Which way down?
which I don't see
What
what,
happens if it goes that way?
Then it's meeting- it's-
refractory of the other ones.
Okay,
right?
good, so.
And
I'm
the
still talking about this
concentration-
one cell,
Yeah.
the concentration going back up is still higher, that it's not gonna go against its concentration gradient,
great,
and it's in refractory.
okay,
So it's gonna
So-
continue down.
so now still talk to me about that cell.
Okay.
So after it's sent its ions down the line, then what?
Then it's in refractory, and it's pumping its calcium out.
Then it's in refractory. Okay, good. Okay. Let's transplant that cell to here. Talk to me about that cell now.
It's the same thing.
Still,
It,
all those statements should still be true.
Okay?
and it's sending its signal out to the side as well, towards those muscles that are delayed.
Okay. What happens if this track right here after this delay, if the set of circumstances were such, just randomly, were such, that after this delay happened, these cells then depolarized completely. But for whatever reason, and we don't need to deal with the reason just yet, but for whatever reason, when the signal came this direction, under normal circumstances, and it got to the AV node, it continued through the AV node and did not continue back up that track.
Was a flutter.
I don't know. Tell me what that means to you.
Did not continue up
So
that
if
track.
if the delay was long enough, such as that those cells went through, hit
Which of those cells?
sorry, the
Right.
track on the right hit the AV node.
Patient's right or my right?
You're right.
You're right.
Thank you.
Hit the AV node. AV node's in refractory, and then the other track goes, and then the cells, the right track has then repolarized, so they can take a signal traveling the opposite direction, and then you would get a circle, which then would be
So,
Flutter.
give me more information. What would happen then in that circumstance?
and then you just get continuing P waves on the EK.
What would happen electrically in that
Oh.
circumstance? Take it a step further, or give a bigger description of what ultimately is going to happen.
Just multiple contractions over and over.
Can I?
The electrical signal is going in a circle, which is causing,
How? From where to where?
I don't know.
So if that signal from our left is delayed and it hits the AV after it's past its refractory, then that signal will pass back up
To the right
Right.
side.
through the right side
To
because
where?
To wherever
to wherever has already passed its refractory. If
Which is where?
if that right side came through, signaled the AV node to pass its signal, and then was done with its refractory, and the left side sent its signal, which was delayed, to in time to meet the when the AV was done with its refractory, then it would pass its signal back up to that right side,
And then
And
To where?
to whatever.
to
To the right side and then where?
and then to everywhere else
Where is everywhere else?
It's gonna
to whatever hasn't had its refractory before the
What
SA.
hasn't had its refractory at that point? What's not in the
everything is
refractory
in refractory except for the signal that's coming back from the SA again.
zone? Say that again.
So if you have a signal traveling, now we're saying we have a repeated signal traveling up that right side. When the SA fires again, the energy is gonna hit, bang against each other.
Okay, that's a possibility.
But if it's
Cancel
if it's slow enough, then that SA node's not going to send its signal yet.
So therefore, what would happen?
So then the signal would go back up, and it
To where?
would go back up towards the SA node,
Okay?
And-
then what?
and it would make a contraction again. It would make the
You
atria.
just changed from.
But it
electrical to
only
No,
make-
the electrical impulse would cause those cells to contract, but so it would originally come from the SA down the chalkboard or the whiteboard right side, hit the AV, be in refractory in time for that left side delay to come down, hit the AV, and go back up the the chalkboard right side, and then back down again and just create a loop, wouldn't it? Because
You were doing great, right? Just the question. Do you
uh,
guys understand what he's trying to say?
yeah,
Yeah.
could I point it out with my
Sure. Finger.
So
Try it.
if this signal comes down here, sets this off, and this signal came down, these signals came down at the same time. This one got delayed. Now this passes its signal, and by the time this one's delayed and then comes down here, and this is done with its refractory, then it will come back up this way, because it can't go this way, because that's in refractory, but this one's not in refractory, so it'll send its signal back up this way. And then, ooh, from here.
Once it hits the SA node.
Now we're
SA node's gonna fire.
So
And
from-
then it'll hit the SA node, but since it came from here, it's not gonna go back this way, because this is in refractory, it'll send it back this way.
And down the middle.
Well, theoretically,
And
the
down the
SA node
middle.
wouldn't fire though,
Right.
depending on how
Well,
fast.
But the question would then be, can this signal that's traveling back up this way hit the SA node and fire off the SA node? And then the signal gets sent again down all the pathways, and it gets delayed here, and the same thing happens again.
So, by your description, wouldn't the patient's left one?
Patience
uh,
left.
Wouldn't that still be in refractory? So the signal wouldn't be able to travel down that one?
Yeah, he
That's-
was doing good right up until the very end where he then contradicted himself.
Okay.
Yeah.
He was doing good until then.
Okay.
I didn't say I had the
I
answer.
guess the one question is, if the signal is backtracked to the SA node and hits the SA node, the patient's left track is in refractory, but the other two are not. So those two could then be fired again. Can the SA node be fired from a backtrack?
What is the SA node?
It's a bunch of autorhythmic cells.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
With the
so-
IO
Yes,
Did it have a threshold to meet, and you meet the threshold and
so
you
yes, so if
Yeah.
it backtracks to the SA node, the two right tracks are out of the refractory period, so the two.
You're really wanting to bring in that third track, aren't you? I don't
Okay,
really,
so-
I'm
so
not
let's-
really caring that these are autorhythmic tracks, that's why I changed it out of that, because it doesn't really matter if it's an autorhythmic track or just contractile cells somewhere in the heart, because the speed of transmission through all those cells is the same.
Okay, so
But
if you
fine, if
take
you
out-
really want to add a third track in there, I'll add a third track in there. What's this cell doing?
Well, okay, so this, if you want to take the tracks out, it doesn't matter at that point, because once the cells, whatever cells are in refractory can't be fired, but other cells can, so other cells are gonna fire. Once those cells fire, these cells will be out of the refractory.
Great, so by the time these start to fire off, what are the refractories, what's the refractoriness of all of these cells?
They've passed it.
They pass it, so if my signal is coming this direction, and these cells are past their refractory, or in the relative refractory, then what'll happen?
Signal will go back up it.
Then it'll go back up. It doesn't matter which of those tracks, if you really wanna keep it in the tracks, because Chandler's
Yeah.
dying to keep all the tracks there.
Gold.
Fine, I don't really care.
Just don't cross your
Right?
feet.
So the signal is still going this way, yes?
Yes,
Right? And what's the SA node?
an autorhythmic cell.
Bunch of contracted area.
What's different about an SA node cell what's different about this SA node cell right there compared to that autorhythmic cell right there?
It has a
Well, the ion
different
flying
voltage.
channels are.
What's that?
It has different voltage.
The IF channels are more unstable.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is anatomically different about it? Nothing, right? Which means if a signal comes into that cell from here, what's it gonna do?
Fire it.
Fire, and then when it fires, what's it gonna wanna do? What does that mean?
Pass that signal, it's
Where?
gonna, to wherever the
That
concentration
Which
gradient
where?
is lower.
The left channel, the only
Right.
channel
You
that's
guys
not
can get your lefts
refractory.
and rights fixed. Let's just always use it in relation to our
Okay,
patients,
so the
because
right
that's how we
track-
do everything.
The right track is is out of refractory, so it can only go that
So then it
direction.
can go back this way, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Alright, but it can't go that way, right?
correct.
Because why?
It's in its
Refractory.
refractory.
Because those are refractory. So then it goes this way, meets this delay right here,
Uh-huh,
gets through it, and continues, and what do we have now?
a flutter.
What just occurred? Think electrically, what just occurred?
A loop.
A loop just occurred, right? We got ourselves into a loop of depolarization. And the continuous loop that we have there was caused because the original set came down everything at once. So the timing that it got stuck into was a continuous timing. Because now, what we have is we have a pseudo AV node right here, right?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
We created a pseudo AV node there, but not with all the same characteristics of the AV node, right?
Right.
Because there's nothing in these cells that makes the channels convoluted, anatomically convoluted like the AV node. The AV node is a mass of convoluted channels with the purpose of delaying the signal for a significant period of time. That's not happening here because there is no anatomical convolution there. There's just something that's delaying the signal for a little bit. So the delay is not exceedingly long like what happens in the AV node. It's just momentary. But if the stars are aligned and that momentary delay is just enough to let other cells finish their refractory period, and if it's just enough that what's going through the AV node doesn't somehow reverse the signal up that last little track right there, then we get ourselves caught into a loop. Make sense? Fun?
My question was gonna be that if it were too short and it hit the AV node during its refractory, then it wouldn't go up.
Then nothing would happen. That's right.
Okay.
It would just have been, it would just have been this part of the atria would have been funky compared to the rest of the part of the atria, but we wouldn't have had this cycle there because that refractoriness would have ended it.
So it just depends on how long the delay is.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, it depends on what's happening right there.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't the signal coming from the left and center go back up the channel with the delay?
It could,
It could.
in which case we wouldn't see
Wouldn't
that
see it.
loop, right? Because it would have potentially canceled itself out, although we will find a different situation that could happen there, right? Altogether. So let's carry that down. Let's go that track for just a minute,
Okay.
Because I'm not specifically talking about a single type of thing right now. But let's say that does happen. So what Mark is suggesting is the circumstances are such that when the signal comes down here, it does come back up this direction, right? And it does hit this area. One of a couple things could happen. What could happen?
It would cancel.
Signal could die. That's right. The signal could just have canceled itself out completely, right? That's one thing that could happen, potentially, right? What if something happens right here, somewhere along here, where, for whatever reason, the ions cease to flow in that moment? In other words, we get to an area, and for whatever reason, the set of cells right there just didn't depolarize. We still have this same anatomical thing that's going on here, but we have a set of cells that they didn't depolarize. I mean, you've got lots of cells, and sometimes they just don't, right? The right ions didn't flow in, whatever, and it didn't depolarize.
Is that like pathological, or is that just like
Usually pathologic, yes.
So
So
then,
what we have is we have a set of cells here. We have signal, 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 and then it just stopped. These cells did not, right here, didn't depolarize, and therefore they're not in refractory. They didn't depolarize, and therefore they're not in refractory, right? And then the signal does come back up this way and starts going through this convoluted mess.
then it would be a loop going the other way.
potential of the delay would be long enough where the other cells would be out of refractory and you go back over?
So now we have a loop the other direction, right? So it doesn't really matter
Would that,
what happens, which direction this ends up going. And we can have loops either direction. We will see a morphology different depending on which direction that loop happens to go, but it doesn't really matter. We still get ourselves into a loop.
if you said it goes, when it comes down the patient's right track there and it hits that and just flat out doesn't depolarize, could it be such that when it backfills the other direction, it hits that same and just doesn't depolarize again?
Absolutely.
But it
In
goes
which case
around
we
it.
wouldn't see a loop, right? We just see an area of,
Dead center.
yeah, absolutely. That's a possibility, right? Okay, so this loop right here is what we call a reentry loop, or a macro reentry loop, where we have the signal re-entering an area that it's usually not supposed to, and something happens that creates that. And normally we've got a delay in that it's built into the heart, right? So normally we have P wave that fires with the AV node delay, and I don't want to call it a delay, but the SA node has a built-in delay. It's not delayed, but it has to reach its threshold each time, right? And so there's a period of time where the SA node, from P to, from one P to the next P, where the SA node hasn't reached its threshold yet, right? And we've got a delay that's going from the AV node into the ventricles, right? But what kind of delay will we have? What kind of separation will we have if we've got this loop happening here?
Can you say that again?
I can. Normally, everything's based on that SA node firing, right?
Yes.
And there's time built in from one SA node firing to the next because it's trying to reach its threshold every time, right? Because it has to build its threshold through the IF channels.
Yes.
Plus, we have this delay in the AV node between the atria and the ventricles.
Yes.
So we have a delay here, and we've got a wait here, because the SA node has to reach its threshold, right? But, in this case, what's causing the SA node to fire? And all the other cells to fire?
The loop.
The loop,
The loop that's there.
which means it
So
doesn't
what
wait.
kind of a pause time do we have between when the SA node fires to when it fires again?
There is none.
There is none. So if there is no delay, if there's no, I hate using that word because I don't want you to think delay in the same sense of AV node.
Pause.
But if there is no time between when the SA node fires and when it is firing again, then what do we see on the EKG?
Constant P waves.
Sawtooth P waves.
You'd be seeing constant P waves.
Are those unaffiliated with QRS?
I'm not saying anything about QRSs right now. I'm only in the atria right now. So yes, unaffiliated with the QRSs right now. Because I'm only talking about atrial stuff right now.
But
Everything
every time
above
it
the
does its little loop through the AV is gonna be cued to fire.
So we're gonna talk about that in one moment. Isolate it to the atria, and then I'll apply it to the AV node in just a moment. Okay? So what we end up getting is we get P waves, right? That happen over and over and over again without any sort of delay, right? Without any sort of pausing in between, without any sort of baseline. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Questions? Yeah.
I guess the wording confuses me a little. Is there any way you can rephrase it, what you just said?
Yes. I don't know. We'll try. So you had the initial SA node fire, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the very first one. It fired off, and it did its thing. But in the process of having sent its signal, we get to a situation where the signal that went through is now reversing itself through. And by the time the signal gets back to the SA node, the signal is forcing the SA node to fire again. And everything else, not just the SA node. But it's firing over and over and over again without time for it to build to its threshold through its own IF channels, because it's being stimulated from something else.
During that time, will the P wave always return to baseline, or will it sometimes get triggered before it's returned to baseline?
Okay, that's a good question. We can't really tell exactly where the baseline is.
Okay.
It does return to baseline, but it doesn't stay on the baseline.
Got
If the majority of the cells that are being depolarized on the second P wave is going away from the camera, how is it a positive deflection?
It won't necessarily be positive. I didn't necessarily draw a positive deflection here.
We can't tell where the baseline
This
is.
can certainly be where the deflection is, and most commonly is. I
Okay.
think it's 2, 3
Makes
dBs.
sense.
Yeah.
So what you're considering, what you're seeing is actually potentially the downward deflection
Yeah,
is what we're seeing, not
absolutely.
the upward.
Well, then why is it so peaked?
Yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
say anything about which direction
Yeah.
it was going. And it ends up having a point to it or a peak to it because there's no time in which it's not refiring. It comes down, hits, and it fires again. Where we'll see that shape, whether we see a fast rise, slow dip, fast rise, slow dip, fast rise, slow dip, or a slow rise, fast dip, slow rise, fast dip, slow rise, fast dip, depends on where that damage is in the heart, and therefore what shape that loop is actually taking, whether it's clockwise, counterclockwise, anterior to posterior, posterior to anterior. So the shape of it will be dependent, and we will see some specific shapes that I'm not going to hold you to. We do see some specific shapes where we see some common problems for this to occur. But the shape of that is completely dependent, and whether it's upright or downward completely depends on where that damage is and whether or not it's taking a counterclockwise or clockwise circuit, which you will not have to determine. But
When you say damage, do you mean like ischemia?
because most of it's related to either ischemia or cardiac disease of some sort, or cells that are diseased in such a way so that their depolarization, repolarization is not timed correctly. So if we have that set of cells, for example, that have a repolarization that is not the same as everything else, then you might miss a complete circuit one time. It's ready to go the next time, and then you get into the loop.
Will the morphology of all the P waves in this instance be the same?
Okay, so yeah,
Okay.
the morphology tends to be the same once you get into that loop because the pathway is the same,
Okay.
right? Now, what Annalise was asking about just a minute ago is what about the AV node, right? Well, the AV node's unique. The AV node is unique. Its refractoriness is more unique than the refractoriness of these other cells because the AV node is designed to protect the ventricles. The AV node is designed to protect the ventricles. So its collection of cells have a different refractory period, and they have a different set of channels that they are functioning off of to create that delay that is already built in to get to the ventricles. So that loop that's happening there, even though these cells are past their refractory period and therefore can re-listen to that signal that's coming, the AV node itself will not necessarily be past its refractory period. And therefore, not every one of those signals will get through.
Does the AV node have a similar refractory in that when it depolarizes, it goes from top to bottom and then repolarizes from top to bottom? Or is it like the ventricle that it'll repolarize in reverse to protect?
No, it repolarizes normally, in from that standpoint. Right, but the refractory period for the AV node is not the same. Those cells have a different refractory period, longer refractory period, and therefore they can't listen to every single signal that's coming through. And that is on purpose. That's on purpose. So the AV node has a protective mechanism that no matter how many signals come from the atria, it will not necessarily have to fire off of every single one of those. It'll be in refractory to many of those.
So the fibers, do they join up before it is technically the AV node?
Yes,
Okay.
because Chandler really wanted me to put these into autorhythmic cells, and I was not necessarily considering these as just autorhythmic cells. They're sometimes just contractile cells where this is happening in the atria. They're not necessarily always in the autorhythmic loops that it's happening. There might be a tract of contractile cells that are this problem, and they're all attached by gap junctions.
And in this case, the blood's actually getting into the ventricles mostly passively because it's not contracting strongly.
Yeah, so we might have a contraction issue, right? Because now we have to think mechanically compared to electrically, and that mechanical system, you simply can't go through the process of having the power strokes and the coupling, the actin-myosin coupling, and the actual physical twitch and relaxation that quickly. So you get into an atria that isn't mechanically affected.
But it's passing it, or the blood's going through passively.
Because
but
we
then-
know that blood passes, how much blood passes passively.
80%.
Yeah.
And then the ventricles are basically still working fine because the AV node is
Correct.
functioning correctly. So they're still pumping blood out
That
into
is
the
correct.
pulmonary system.
That's correct.
Okay.
So
But only at
the,
80%.
so the key characteristic to this rhythm that you just saw, which was what we ended up last time, was a flutter, right? The key characteristic that you see with a flutter is an atria that's firing all the time, never creating a moment of baseline. Right? So as you look through all these are examples of a flutter. All of those are examples of a flutter.
And they're burying the T. I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, so what you see, look on the back side first.
Which
Look on
one's the
the
back
3 to
side?
1, 4 to 1 side first. Right? And in fact, look at the first 4 to 1. You note that they all look the same, or at least that there's 2 of them
Mm-hmm.
in each complex that look exactly the same, right?
Mhm.
These two,
One following QRS.
morphology, and all of them look the same.
Mm-hmm.
You'll note, though, that the one right before it, which is where the T wave is, would look the same, except why?
The T-wave.
It's got T wave activity that has to be plugged into it as well, right? You'll also note that the Q wave looks funky, because the QRS complex looks funky, because right at the beginning of it looks like there's something added to it, because there's no baseline leading into it. Does that make sense?
Where?
Leading right up into the QRS complex. It looks like there's something funky at the beginning of the QRS complex.
Mm-hmm.
There's no PR.
Yeah, exactly.
So
And that's because there's another one right there too, right? Because we don't have any sort of baseline on them all. We just keep going and going and going. The morphology is the same. If we were to take out the ventricles completely, if we were to isolate the ventricles out, we would see nothing but the same waveform going back and forth the whole time. We then add the ventricles back in, we add the QRS complex back in and the T wave back in, and now we see some changes in the morphology where the QRS complex is, and we see some changes in the morphology where the T wave is because of the QRS complex and because of the T wave.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And that's the characteristic that you see on all of these. But you can see many different morphologies. For example, that 4 to 1 that you're looking at right now is very different than the 3 to 1 right above it. Right? Which is very different than the 4 to 1 right below it. The difference in that morphology is completely dependent on where exactly the damaged part of the heart is happening, and therefore where does this macro reentry circuit begin. And that changes that morphology. Okay? Okay, starting from the front side on the 2 to 1s, you'll note that that's a 2 to 1 right there. You have the second F wave. Now remember that we call these F waves, not P waves, because they aren't really P waves anymore, because they aren't organized P activity. They're this reentry process, and we need to distinguish them a little bit.
These are capitals.
So we call these capital F waves. Capital F waves.
Waivers.
Capital F waves. So you note that in that first one, that 2 to 1, in the second half of the second F wave begins the QRS complex, and the QRS complex ends at the beginning of the first F wave within the system. Does that make sense? Same thing is true about the one right below it. Same thing is true about the third one. In the fourth one, note that you have an entire F wave hidden within the QRS complex itself, and it makes the QRS complex look what?
Wide.
It makes the QRS complex look wide. So we will have a very difficult time actually measuring and finding out exactly what's happening with the QRS complexes, because it does look wider than normal in that particular one.
Well, where did the QRS electric line?
It's a great question. We can't. We can't actually determine exactly where that isoelectric line is, because there's never a time where there is an isoelectric line. So we can't actually tell where that is. We don't know if these F waves are truly negative, truly positive, or very biphasic. We can't really tell. So we can't really tell where that line is. That makes a lot of things very difficult.
You have a little, if you knew which lead you were looking into, you'd have a better idea of where an isoelectric line would be. How so? Potentially. How so? I'm just trying to think of, if I was looking at lead 2 versus lead 5.
How would you know the difference?
Oh, B5.
Knowing if you had a generalized knowledge of what a waveform should look like,
Great.
you'd have a better idea of what it should look
So it's supposed to be positive in B6. Great. And what does that say about what the baseline is?
like. I don't know yet.
You can't. That's kind of the whole point. You can't tell. You can't tell where that baseline is.
So you just treat rate?
Well, now the question is, are we treating rate? Are we treating the patient? What's the problem with the patient? Right? So last week, we discussed that there are times where you look at an EKG and you take the clinical correlation with what's going on with the patient, and based on that information, you have to treat the EKG in order to treat the patient. Other times, you have to treat the patient in order to fix the EKG. Right? And you need more information than what you're seeing here, because you need to actually look at the patient too. Does that make sense? And then be sure that when you are, so anytime you're noting a flutter, I'll want you to note the conduction as well, which is how many P waves to how many QRS complexes. Always remember that is typically one hidden within the QRS complex. Right? So if you're looking at 1, 2, 3, like the fourth one down of the 2 to 1s, you've got a flutter wave that is completely hidden inside that QRS complex. And that is one of the 2. Right? So that's a 2 to 1.
And they should march out,
It should.
so you can tell for.
So you'll have, so the AV node will do one of a couple things. Either it'll build its refractory in a cycle so that it feeds off the same signal each time, in which case you'll get an actual conduction ratio, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, something like this. Or the AV node will not build off of an exact cycling, and it'll be variable. This fly is going to come. And it'll build off of a different cycle, and it'll be variable. And you'll see conduction that's all over the place, in which case you call that variable.
Is that where you see like 4 to 1 and then 3 to 1 and then 4
Yeah,
to 1,
you might
5
have,
to 1?
yep, it might be all over the place.
Variable.
In which case you call that variable conduction. So name the conduction if you can, and if you can't name the conduction because it's all over the place, then you would say it's variable conduction.
And you also want us to identify the atrial rate and then the ventricle rate too.
Yes, this is the time. I won't ask you how to change that. I won't be asking you for the atrial rate in a flutter, but this is the appropriate time for you to start recognizing that the atria and the ventricles sometimes fire separately, with separate rates. And you'll note that the rate of the atrial fire is right about what on all of those?
300.
Yeah, it's right about 300. It's typically someplace between 200 and 400. So that means you'll see an F wave how often? You'll see a large F wave how often?
Every box.
One big box.
Every big box. Yep. So if you start seeing what looks like a P wave, every big box, that's your first clue. Then you look at it and you go, okay, there's no baseline. That's your second clue, right? And then most of them will have some sort of a characteristic sawtooth pattern to it, looking like the teeth of a saw. Sawtooth.
Oh.
That's why it's called that.
Oh.
Okay. So that's where you'll start to see those patterns put together and you name it a flutter.
I did that.
If you couldn't tell from just looking at that F waves, could you just take the R to R, and if it's like a 3 to 1 conduction, multiply it by 3, as far as the rate goes?
Say that again?
Does that make sense?
I get what you're saying, so
Oh, yeah.
It's R to R's.
Like if you had a hard time measuring, like how frequent the F waves were. If you just take the R to R interval
Yeah,
and then multiply it by whatever
if you've got a conduction that comes out of it, it'll be a multiple of it.
Okay.
Yeah. One thing to look at on the 2-to-1s, it's really common, there's a really common A flutter that starts to occur that's a 2-to-1 conduction. If you find somebody that has almost exactly 150 heart rate with their QRS complexes, and especially if that QRS complex looks difficult to measure, like you can't quite get the measurement, it looks wide, but it looks like there's some funk related to it, then be really suspicious of an A flutter with a 2-to-1 conduction, which is a really common finding for A flutter. Look at the very bottom of the 2-to-1s. That would be an example, right? You have almost exactly 150 in terms of its rate. The QRS complex, you're looking at that going, I don't know, is this wide, is this not wide? It looks like there's something built into it. I don't see any baseline there. Be suspicious of A flutter. Good? Okay, questions on that? Fantastic, get up and stretch.